Hello, this is Margaret Ajibole, the STEM Positive Disruptor, and today I have a special guest, Dr. Anna Ploszajski. And I'm just so grateful that she's come on board today to be able to talk to us about what she does. She's an award-winning material scientist. She's an engineer too, and a storyteller. Actually, it's much more than that, but she can tell us more about that. And the reason why we set up this platform is we want to educate, we want to raise awareness, we want to change people's perception and demystify what STEM is, that science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We want to bring the public into our domain. We want to showcase the different roles that are available. We also want to enthuse our young people to think about taking STEM as a subject in school, but also as a professional down the line. And this is why we do what we do. We want to showcase people like Anna, who's making a huge difference. Oh gosh, she's so amazing. But I don't want to blow her trump. She can blow herself, but I am so, but she's so wonderful, and I really do want to celebrate her today because she's achieved so much in such a short period of time. But again, we're celebrating. It's not about age, it's just about her passion for what she does, and that comes through, and people are celebrating that. We want to celebrate that too, but also we want to get the education system, the government, and the industry start talking, because we talk about the skills shortage, we talk about the gaps in the industry. Why can't we get why can't we get young people ready for that? So we want to change the narrative. We don't want to complain anymore. We want to say, look, these are the solutions that are available, and this is what you should start thinking about. It's about being preempted and looking at ways to do that, so that by the time they come out, they're ready to fit into that industry or whatever they decide to do. So without further ado, hello, Anna, again. Thank you for coming on board. Thank you.
Oh, Margaret, what a lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be talking to you today, and I feel like many of our missions align with each other. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. You know what? I'm seriously, truly impressed because, again, I talk about you being an award-winning material scientist, which you are. You're an engineer, storyteller. You're a comedian as well. You play the trumpet. I
Oh,
play the
yes.
saxophone, by the way, but so that's
Oh,
really cool.
cool.
And you're
Oh, I love that.
also ultra endurance swimmer as well. You did it's an English channel, and
Yes.
I'm so impressed with you, because again, what they're saying is that it's not just about you being technical. It's not you just looking at life in a professional way. Of course, that's very important, but it's also about the bigger scheme of things, because you're much more than your career itself. And I do love what you do, because you podcast as well, and it's called Handmade. And you recently wrote a book called Handmade. It was a scientist's search for meaning through making. So you're going to tell us
Yeah.
more about that too. But tell us more about your journey, because again, it's so fascinating. I can talk about it, but hey, you're here, so why don't you talk about it yourself? Go on.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so how far back would you like me to go? Are we
Oh, just
looking at kind of
very
childhood
short
Anna?
period. Oh no. No, but just why materials? Why? Because you have a passion for materials. You're not
Yeah.
specializing in one thing. What you're saying, you're a generalist material scientist. Why did you feel that's important? And it's about making, it's about trying and tasting, testing it out in so many different forms and creating things from it. Why that?
Mm. So if you'll indulge me, I will go slightly back to my childhood, which is just to
Okay.
say that I've always been broad in my interests, let's say. So when I was studying at school, yes, I enjoyed STEM subjects like physics and chemistry and maths, but I had an equal love for music and languages and English literature and geography and history. And in the UK school system, unfortunately, we have to narrow those choices down as we go older. And so when it came to doing that, I tried to keep as broad an option as possible, but still, when it came to choosing university choices, that was the point that I really had to take the leap in one direction or the other. And so I ended up studying material science, which was actually a complete accident. I was trying to study physics, and
Ah,
I applied to different universities in the UK to study physics, and I got offered material science instead of physics by one of the unis, which was Oxford, because they were very low on material science applicants. I'd never heard of material science. I didn't really know what it involved. I did a bit of a Google before accepting the place, and I found out that it was sort of a mixture between science and engineering. And so I'll sometimes describe myself as an engineer because I'm a material scientist, because the two are very, very interlinked when it comes to materials. But I loved my material science education. I found it a wonderful mix of quite hardcore science, quantum mechanics about why glass is transparent, and really involved chemistry about how metals blend together to make alloys, and different composites blend together as well. And that was tied though with always the practical application of the engineering side. And that's what I really loved about it, was that it married these two aspects of very technical maths to explain the scientific phenomena of materials, but always with an eye on, okay, so what can we make with this? How can we use this? How can we make the world better based on our knowledge of these materials scientifically? And that's what I really loved. I decided to do a PhD in material science as well, which involves narrowing yourself even further into an area of material science. And that was in hydrogen storage materials. So looking to create sort of sustainable energy technologies. And at that point, that was when I got interested in science communication, and I started to broaden out again. Having narrowed all the way down, I started to broaden out again because I was intrigued by this idea that, I had never heard of material science, but I got into it with a very, very happy accident. And I found that, my friends and family also had never heard of material science, didn't really understand what I did. And so I wanted to start sharing my passion for materials that I had found with other people. And I found out very early on that, yes, I could engage them with my research, but actually it was so much more creative and enjoyable for me to do that as a materials generalist, as you just mentioned in the introduction. So, this approach of coming at communicating what I do from the audience's perspective. So what are they interested in? And how can I bring material science to meet them there? That's always been my philosophy with communicating science. And so now I work as a full-time science communicator. And so I've broadened out to the biggest extent, really. And I try to communicate my enthusiasm for material science and what it means through all sorts of different media, as you've mentioned, writing, podcasting, trying to do bits of TV and radio and writing, and all these different ways to share this passion. And ideally to kind of touch people's lives, to kind of show them where materials touch their lives, and really make it relevant for them.
Indeed. That's so fascinating. I do love the fact that it's by chance that you got into materials. And that's okay. And I think this happens as well, because sometimes unless it's brought to your attention, you never think about it. And even though you Googled it before you accepted it, but look at you now having so much fun. And I think it's so important from us that are within the STEM world to be able to communicate what we do. And we struggle with that because, again, sometimes get so blurred. And when we talk about STEM in general, we talk about science, they really translate as science, but it's not really much more than that. And I think, in a way, I do love what you said about combining the science aspect of it and the engineering, and this is what you do. And this also led to you doing your podcast, and you interviewing and doing lots of things like that. And from that, you translate it and get it into a book. And I think that's quite powerful because, again, because of your passion. Again, don't take anything away from it. It's your passion for that. That's why you felt it was so important. So even though you became a specialist, you need that for you to open the doors to other people. You had to communicate it somehow. And this is what you're doing right now. So even though you said you brought it up, you've actually just really said, I have to tell you my story. I have to tell you why I love what I do. And so that's powerful. That is so powerful because we don't do that enough. There are lots of people doing that, but we don't do that enough, and we think we need to do that because the public don't fully understand who we are and what we do. So going fast forward, so you've been doing podcasting for a while. You said you've been on TV, radio. I mean, you've won quite a lot of awards. I mean, you've done so many things. Even a patent was at the age of 22. I understand. Look, I'm celebrating you. I'm not, I'm just saying I'm grateful that you're doing so much, because what it shows, everything is possible. I mean, of course, within the limits, of course, but if you have a drive for it, if you have a hunger for it, it is possible. So, and that's what you showcase itself. So fast forward, why did you feel that from your podcast called Handmade, that a book was needed for scientists? Because again, this is so important. And I know that there's people who already know about that, but not everyone, the audience doesn't, not every person will know. So please very briefly explain why it was so important.
Yeah, it's I've never been asked that question before.
Oh, okay, this was the first time.
Yeah. I think when I created my podcast, it's because I loved the medium of podcasts, actually. I'm such an avid podcast listener. I love the quite intimate relationship the podcaster has with their listeners. And as a great listener myself, I feel like all of the presenters of my favorite podcasts are my best friend, because it's almost like a one-on-one conversation, although it's obviously one way.
Of course.
And so I love the medium, and so I wanted to create my own podcast. And one of the things that I always struggle with in my work as a science communicator is to access audiences who wouldn't normally find scientific and engineering content. And so I wanted to find an audience that would be interested in it if they only, knew where to find it, if that makes sense. And so
Sure.
I was always fascinated by this intersection between science and art when it comes to materials.
Mm-hmm.
And so my podcast was about interviewing material experts about materials. But the thing about those experts was that they weren't allowed to be scientists. So they could be craftspeople, they could be artists, historians, makers, anthropologists, any person who was an expert about a material because they made stuff with it, or they studied the history of the Roman Empire that used that material, and everything in between. And so I ended up interviewing over 90 experts about materials.
Wow.
in my podcast. And those conversations showed me that everyone has a story to tell with the material. And so the book really was my opportunity to tell my own stories with materials. As you will know, as the podcast host, sometimes you talk a little bit about yourself, but it's really about talking about the guest on the podcast every week.
Indeed, yeah.
And so I wanted that opportunity, having been inspired by these 90 plus experts to tell their stories about materials. I recognized that I had a few to tell of my own, and I'd always loved writing. I was very, very fortunate to meet a literary agent who was able to help me with the practical side of writing a book, of getting a deal, of finding a publisher, etc. And the book was a lovely opportunity to do a really long form storytelling exercise on science communication about material science with story.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. I love that. And I think, in a way, as you said, we all have a story to tell, even though, excuse me, where podcasting is concerned, we're actually talking about the persons coming for they're the ones that we want to showcase. And that's what we're doing, as we do right now. But it's also quite interesting as well, so that we all have a story to tell. And you translate that into a book form to say, hey, this is the things that I have discovered. This is the things I've learned through my conversation, but also based on my own journey as well. And that's wonderful. And I also like the fact that from that, I mean, I'm sure that was, they were maybe working in alignment, is that you also felt there was a need to train other engineers, scientists, and young people to communicate science and engineering. I mean, I love what you do. Sorry, I like that, because there are lots of conversations that are going on around that we don't have enough technical communicators or in the media. And the fact that you saw, again, what you're doing is you've seen a gap, you've seen a need, and you're doing something about it. And it's so, so important because, again, how else would the public know what we do unless we have more of the likes of yourself going out there talking about what they do? And the passion, because your passion for materials is translated in such a way that when they hear you, they say, wow, okay, I never thought about that. That's good. So how did you start this train? Because basically what you're doing is train those who you feel, oh, or those who feel they have the potential to be communicators as well. Because so we all feel we can do something. So tell us more about that.
While I was working as a scientific researcher doing my PhD, and I did a couple of postdoctoral jobs as well as a science researcher, I started applying what I'd been learning in stand-up comedy and writing and podcasting, science communication basically, to writing up my thesis or writing papers or giving presentations. And my theoretical basis of all of my science communication work has always been storytelling. I got interested in it about 10 years ago as a methodology for communication. Stories are such an inherent way that we as human beings communicate with each other and that we take on information, you know, right from being tiny little children, right? We understand how the world works. We get to grips with right and wrong through stories.
Of course.
And our enjoyment of stories never shifts, right? Even into adulthood, we love books and movies and TV shows, and we love assimilating to characters. We love going on journeys with other characters and learning about different worlds and different sorts of people from different places that have different experiences to our own. It's such a vital part of being a human is consuming stories. So that power I was really interested in leveraging in order to bring science alive for people who don't work in science. So I started studying storytelling and using storytelling techniques in my stand-up comedy and the podcasting and the writing and stuff. And about 2 years ago, oh, sorry, I've skipped a step. So I was doing that, and then I applied that to writing my PhD thesis and writing my papers. And I found that went down really well, even to an academic audience, structuring my work as a story, beginning, middle, end, you know, simple structure, using myself as the character. Here's the journey that I went on to discover why this hydrogen storage polymer composite is so good in my case. And that, like I say, was well received in the scientific community. And so I recognized a opportunity there, as you say, to help other technical people communicate what they do through story. And the reason that's that it's quite a friendly way for scientists and engineers to get into communication is that stories are very formulaic. And of course, in science and engineering, maths, we're all about formulae. We try and fit the world to formulae. And so that's all a story is fitting, you know, a series of events to a formula. And so for the last 2 years, I've stepped away from scientific research and I run a storytelling business full-time, training scientists, engineers, science teachers, technical people in the art of storytelling to help them communicate what they do better.
You know, I love what you do, and I'm celebrating that because we need it. It's a needed thing, and I think you know, it's easy for us to complain about something that does not work, but we are saying, okay, fine, but we can change that, and that's what you've done. You've changed that narrative to make it more accessible in a sense that, look, I can show you how to do it because I have a journey. This is what I started doing, and this is I can appreciate and I can see how the audience respond to certain things. So, you know, and I thank you for that. And if you were to talk to other, because not everyone wants to work in a technical world, as you were saying, some people maybe fall into something, but they may want to communicate it, be a communicator of some sort. So what would you say to those that I think are aspiring to be that?
I guess the first thing to say is that it doesn't have to be either or, right? You can be a very technical person and a good communicator. And that's what I'm always trying to tease out of my people that I train. It's such a problem of the kind of educational system that we often pit the arts and the sciences against each other, or we separate them rather into two very separate camps, and you're not allowed to cross between them. You have to choose when you're 15 years old or whatever it is.
That's so true.
And that's unhelpful on so many levels. It disempowers us as technical people to think that, I can't stand on stage, or I can't write a creative paper, I can't interact with the media because people won't understand me because I'm too technical. Of course that's not true. So it's about kind of breaking down those barriers between the kind of creative arts, the expressive arts, and between science and engineering, because we've all got it in us, right? We all consume stories, we all tell stories all the time to our friends and our family. So it's just about really opening people's eyes to the fact that of course they can communicate science, and vice versa as well. Storytellers and artistic people, of course you can get involved in STEM subjects, even if you haven't chosen to study those, because it should be open to everyone.
Indeed, you're so right, and that's so true. So I love what you said. I think the education system is not really perfect. I think we're struggling. So what would you say to the education system? Because I think we try to pigeonhole you at an early age and make you make choices that maybe not will not really is not going to help. And then sometimes you choose something only because you have no other choice, whereas you would like ideally to combine it. So what would you say to the education system, especially where young people are concerned? We've been there, we've now had to adapt and find our way, but those that are coming through the system, what would you say to those powers that be? How can they make it more enjoyable, make it more, I don't know, accessible, easier for those going through that journey or have to make a decision?
So hard. I really don't envy young people having to make those decisions about their futures. But I suppose what I would say retrospectively is that you don't have to close any doors if you don't want to. Particularly having worked in an area like material science, there is such a confluence of lots of different traditional subjects that come together. I've seen people come into, in this example, material science at undergraduate level like me, but also at postgraduate level, through apprenticeship routes. There are so many different ways to sort of come into this that don't start at your choices at age 15, 16, 17. Yet, unfortunately, in order to sort of become expert and to take a deep dive into a subject, we do have to push others aside. There are only so many hours in the day, unfortunately.
Indeed, so true.
And so there's always this tension between breadth and depth, I suppose, in terms of the education that we are allowing people to have, as young people. And so I suppose what I would say is we don't necessarily need to change this system too radically, but I think what's important is to empower young people to know that, if you love science and you want to study science, but you're also enjoying English, there's no reason why you can't, become a writer or use those skills in a communication heavy role as a scientist. I think it's really important that we celebrate the creative skills involved in STEM subjects to demonstrate that you're not closing yourself off to opportunities by choosing STEM routes, and vice versa as well. I've recently been working with an arts university who have a kind of material science department within an arts university. And so there's all sorts of sideways steps that you can make throughout your whole career that, unless you want to be something extremely specific, like a medic or a lawyer, where there is an obvious training pathway there, for the vast majority of us, we can change and we can sidestep and we can go, change paths many, many times in a career. And so I think that's the important point that often gets lost when we're talking about career choices for young people, is keeping an open mind. And following what you're good at and what you enjoy, and seeing what exciting pathways that leads you to. Because young people I mean, the job market is changing so much already. It's
Yeah.
about grasping the opportunities as they come up rather than trying to preempt those
Indeed.
3, 5, 10, 20 years down the line.
But isn't that why the system has to help to make it easier? Because again, we have, even though young people are not super, but they have to in so many ways, because not everyone has that drive that maybe you have, Anna. Not everyone can follow through. Some just drop out because they just feel it's over for them. So just really very briefly, how would the system, the education system, especially, because I think at university you're much more mature, isn't it? Best place in your mindset anyway, to know that, okay, fine, you can play around. But in the early age, it's not always that perfect because you're driven by what your peers are doing, you're driven by maybe other things, factors. But if the education system enables or makes it easier, what would you say to that young person, maybe when you were 11, 12, 13, before you started making those choices? What would you say to the system? If I had this, if I knew this, or if I could have done this, would I, you know, because you fell into the material science in a sort of strange way, but not everyone may have that same opportunity. So just very briefly, what would you say?
I think if I could wave a magic wand, what I would want to change would be for everybody's skills to be recognized. You know, some people are just happen to be very good at doing tests and so they're the ones that get the points and the adoration from their teachers. Other people, you know, are equally as bright and brilliant, but maybe they're really good at making stuff, or maybe they're really good at understanding how things go together. Maybe they're really empathetic and they're really good at understanding people and, you know, their peers around them. Those are such important life skills, career skills, skills for us to take through into adulthood and into our careers. And I would really, really love to see a way that we can recognize everybody's abilities, not just the ones that are good at doing tests, because those are the skills actually that, you know, see people succeed later in their careers. The interpersonal skills, the practical skills, that's
the soft
the
skills,
useful
basically.
stuff.
100%.
Exactly. And so I would love to see young people who are good at that stuff really recognized and celebrated and encouraged to use those skills in their early education as well.
Indeed. And you know, I thank you so much for that. I think in a way what you're saying is that there's different learning styles, and we need to find a way to incorporate that within our system so that everyone can have a fair chance as well. Because again, you are able to pull up that. And you made a good point, not about those who are very good at doing tests. They're very good at cramming information, retaining information, and are able to do well at that day. But really, there are other skill sets that they're lacking, but you don't see that. You're only driven by the physical, what the outputs. And I think that's a wrong way of making decisions, because it's not always a true reflection of that person or the other people that maybe are left behind itself. But you know, I thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I seriously, I'm celebrating you, and I'm celebrating what you've achieved. I'm celebrating the changes you're making with your communication, the storytelling, because it's a wonderful thing you're doing. It's a wonderful way of, again, engaging the audience, engaging the public to see what we do. And it's also about you find that people who listen to you are then able to make some decisions. Hold a minute. She's this, she's that. Oh my gosh, I can do that as well. And I can also be technical. I can be much more than what is presented to me. So, you know, I can talk with you all day, and I'm so appreciative.
Likewise.
But I want them to listen to you. And I seriously, you've given me such great nuggets, and I really want to share that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on board. It is such a wonderful experience, you having taking time out to speak to me.
Oh my gosh, likewise, me too. Yeah, I've loved this conversation. Thank you for the work that you do as well, spreading the good word about STEM and all the sorts of different people that work in it.
Well, thank you. Well, we all, as you said, we're doing similar things, but in a different way. But We all want to spread the word. We all want to make that difference, and that's what we're doing. And so thank you so much. So appreciate you coming on board. Thank you. Again, this is Margaret Ajibode with an amazing guest, Dr. Anna Ploszajski. Look, you have to listen to this podcast. Again, she's so passionate about science, material science and engineering, telling a story. It's just wonderful. You have to listen to her. So again, please, if you love this podcast, please share with your network and let's spread the word as well of the great things she's doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.